Hello and welcome back to this damn idealistic crusade. In this video, I wanted to talk a little bit about the interesting pulp story, The Shadow of Wall Street, which was published in Fame and Fortune magazine in 1929. This has long been thought to be an inspiration for the character of the Shadow, and thus has been talked about or referenced in a lot of different articles and various other books as one of the primary inspirations for the character who essentially birthed the hero pulp magazine industry and is the single most influential character on all of comics and beyond. So I, of course, wanted to read this at some point, but I wasn't aware that Sanctum Books, as part of their reprint series, had actually done a beautiful little replica of the actual story with the original cover artwork as part of one of their multi-packs of various volumes. I think this is the only Shadow-related additional story that they did in one of those, and luckily enough I managed to find a copy at my local comic shop that had just gotten separated from one of those, so I thought it would be fun and important to at least cover as part of my overall Shadow video series. So again, this was published in 1929 as part of the Fame and Fortune magazine. We have beautiful, very pulp magazine artwork of a figure cloaked and hooded with its hands outstretched over the entirety of what seems to be Wall Street. The story is credited to Frank Lawton, but was written actually by George Jenks, as most pulp novels were written under pseudonyms. The actual printing is done in the same lovely Sanctum style, so we get not only a perfect recreation of the original, very rare and rarely read pulp story, as it was never really reprinted before this point, but we also get some lovely historical essays and pieces, as Sanctum always did, so this is worth more than just actually reprinting the very rare story. So we get a lovely foreword by Anthony Tollin, the man behind Sanctum's beautiful reprints, and then we get the perfect recreation of the Shadow of Wall Street story. Now, since this is a standalone pulp novel and it was only a part of a magazine, that means the actual story itself isn't too terribly long, hence why this actual volume is much thinner than the other Sanctum volumes, which usually reprinted two novels in one. The story itself concerns a young man who's come to the city and decides to try his hand at being a stockbroker, and he is the character we sort of view the story through, but essentially Wall Street is being seemingly menaced by a character known as the Shadow, who appears hooded and sometimes cloaked in a cape. But essentially the Shadow is out to ostensibly try and control or dictate the ups and downs of Wall Street, but over the course of the story it becomes apparent that in actuality he is someone who is not only trying to influence Wall Street, but try to keep it out of the hands of various racketeers and criminal factions. So you do have the elements of a character named the Shadow, who is cloaked or masked or hidden away, who is operating in the darkness and trying to keep criminal factions at bay, or of course stop them. But outside of that, that's really the only connection. So unfortunately, the notion that, oh, this was the primary influence for the Shadow, or one of the influences, not really. I mean, outside of the name and that you have a figure who's sort of battling crime, and they sometimes have a cloak and wear a hood, so, and they have a dual identity. I mean, that those are about the only connections you could make, and it's really just the name being the same. That's the only major connection. And the articles here do go into that, but they clearly state that they thought it was still important to publish this as part of their Shadow reprints, and also to actually get the story out there so people could actually read it. We have the story reprinted in the same lovely dual column style with the beautiful reset type font, so it looks really nice and clean and very well done, but the opening illustration is the only one for the story, and it only runs 29 pages. So that means you have the rest of the book filled with the beautiful supplements. We have another incredible Will Murray essay, and then we actually have an entire essay about the author of The Shadow of Wall Street. So you get full historical context about the original author of this particular story, Fame and Fortune magazine, and also what the status of pulp magazines was for Street and Smith at this time. And then the rest of the book is filled up with a nice scrapbook of beautiful, rare images about the development of the Shadow as a character in both both the radio and pulp mediums, and then just an overall sense of the evolution of the history of the character condensed down into a number of pages with beautiful images that are very well reproduced. This is all extraordinarily rare material that you're not really going to find much elsewhere, and of course it's all been beautifully reproduced, and you get the wonderful text to go along to give you the historical context. And of course this is all the more fascinating for us Shadow fans who are obsessed with the character, and it's just fascinating to see all the different avenues of promotion and different ways the character was adapted, and how all of this evolved over time, and how the character was seen by the public in the 1930s. Down to the Shadow himself making a parade appearance. So again, this is another essential part of the Sanctum Shadow reprint series. The story itself is well written enough. It's a solid, fun story, but it really doesn't have anything to do with the Shadow in terms of the pulp character that we know and love, outside of the name and the fact that it was a Street and Smith publication, and you had a character referred to as the Shadow who had a sort of mask and cloak and was fighting crime in a way, but outside of that, that's really the only major connections. It's a fun story, and I'm very glad it was reprinted by Sanctum. But again, this was only put out as part of one of their multipacks of volumes, and all the Sanctum releases are sadly long out of print and are increasingly difficult to get on the used market. But I just wasn't aware they had done this as one of their multipacks. Usually those just had some beautiful art cards and things inside, in addition to individual volumes that you could already get separately. But apparently this is the one pack-in that they did as a printed book, and decided to do the story often called the inspiration for the character, as it came out in 1929 and had a character literally called the Shadow. But you read this story and, of course, the wonderful essays that go along with it, you can very quickly tell that is not the case, but at least it's a fun part of the development and history of the character. So those are my thoughts on finally reading The Shadow of Wall Street, the story that's often called the inspiration for the Shadow in the pulp magazines, but it really isn't. It's a fun aspect of the character, and it's something I think all Shadow fans should read, but it's a very rare and obscure story, and unless you manage to find an original pulp magazine, the only way I think you can read it is this one-off reprinting from Sanctum Books, who only did it as part of one of their Shadow collection multi-packs of volumes. So this will be very difficult to track down, and I don't think they made very many, so I'm very happy I managed to stumble across a copy and finally got to read this story. But it's an important part of the Shadow's lore, I think, because this story has been so often called the basis of the character, but again, it really isn't. But it's admirable that Sanctum did this, and also put their usual effort and care into also making some lovely essays and resetting the original text beautifully and reproducing the cover artwork very well. So this is an essential part of anyone's Shadow collection or Sanctum collection, and I just thought it was important to highlight, since I'm doing a video series on the actual Shadow pulp novels, so it made sense to start with this, which is often called the inspiration for the Shadow, but it in fact is not. So as always, I hope my babbles about the Shadow and the world of pulp heroes and pulp magazines has at least been somewhat fun and informative. Please do keep supporting all the wonderful independent and other publishers who are doing incredible work at preserving the history of the pulp magazines and characters. Keep supporting your local independent bookstores and comic shops by hopefully being able to pick up some back issues and various Sanctum issues you might stumble across, because they pop up every once in a while. Otherwise, we're all doing eBay searches and trying not to pay through the nose as the unfortunately out-of-print volumes keep skyrocketing due to Condé Nast pulling the various licenses. So until they allow someone else to reprint the classic novels, we're stuck trying to track down all the Sanctum volumes. But it's well worth it, as these are, I think, the gold standard for pulp reprints. So keep enjoying classic pulp adventures, keep reading print books, and as always, thank you ever so much for watching.